The drive home from Columbus takes about an hour and 40 minutes if you stay off the interstate and cut through the back roads past Cedarville. I've made that drive 100 times. I know every pothole, every field, every rusted mailbox along Route 72. That Tuesday morning in March, I drove it in silence with the radio off, thinking about nothing in particular, except that my hip was stiff from 3 weeks of sleeping on Gary's pull-out couch, and that I was looking forward to my own bed, my own coffee maker, and the quiet of my own house. I hadn't realized how much I'd been looking forward to that quiet until I pulled into the driveway and saw Brianna's car parked sideways, blocking the garage door. I sat there for a second. Then I grabbed my duffel from the back seat and went inside. The living room smelled different. Something floral and sharp, like one of those plug-in air fresheners. The blinds were open on the south window, the one I always kept half closed because the afternoon sun fades the hardwood. There were throw pillows on my couch that I had never seen before, cream-colored, with little tassels, and a wicker basket full of magazines sitting on my coffee table where my reading lamp used to be. I didn't say anything yet. I set my bag down by the door and walked toward the hallway. The door to my study was closed. That door is almost never closed. I built that room out myself 12 years ago, converted it from a sunroom after Patricia passed, and I needed somewhere to put her sewing machine, my drafting table, the bookshelves I'd been hauling around since my 20s. It was my room. Not in an aggressive way, just in the way that a man of 63 who has lived alone for 9 years develops certain rhythms, certain spaces that belong to him the way a heartbeat belongs to a chest. That room was mine. I tried the handle. It was locked. I stood there for a moment, looking at the knob. Then I heard Brianna come down the stairs behind me. "Oh, Ray, you're back." She said it like I was the mailman, like my presence in my own house required a mild note of acknowledgement and nothing more. I turned around. She was holding a mug with both hands, wearing a sweatshirt I didn't recognize, hair pulled up. "What's going on with this door?" I said. She glanced at it. "I've been using that room for my art stuff. Connor helped me move some things around while you were gone. It's kind of set up now, so." She trailed off and took a sip from her mug. I looked at her for a long moment. "Where are my things?" "I think most of it is in the garage." Connor put it in the garage. "There's a shelf out there." I didn't raise my voice. Patricia always said that was the thing about me that unnerved people, that I get quieter when I'm angry, not louder. I took one breath through my nose and said, "I'd like the key." Brianna looked mildly inconvenienced. "I don't think there's a key. Connor just put that little latch on so it would stay closed while I'm working." "A latch? It's not a big deal, Ray. You were gone for 3 weeks and the room was just sitting there." I walked past her to the garage door at the end of the kitchen hallway and pushed it open. My drafting table was shoved against the far wall underneath a workbench. Both leaves were folded down. My bookshelves, 3 of them, oak, that I'd built myself from a plan in a woodworking magazine back in 1998, were stacked on top of each other in the corner, one with a cracked side panel. My file cabinet was there, but the top drawer was open, and half the folders had been dropped in a plastic bin nearby like they'd been sifted through. And there, on a folding table next to the lawnmower, in a cardboard box that hadn't even been taped shut, were Patricia's things. Her ceramic robin, the framed photo of us from our trip to Gatlinburg in 2003, her copy of the Bible with the torn cover that had sat on my desk for 9 years because I couldn't think of anywhere else that felt right for it. I picked up the Bible, held it. Brianna had followed me to the garage doorway. She said something about how she'd been careful with everything, how she'd made sure nothing got damaged. I didn't hear most of it. I set the Bible down gently. Then I walked back through the kitchen, picked up my duffel bag from the front hall, and went upstairs to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed for about 10 minutes, just breathing. Connor and Brianna had been living with me for 2 years and 4 months. He'd called me in October of the year before last, 31 years old at the time, telling me that the logistics company he'd been managing contracts for had laid off half its workforce, and he and Brianna were struggling with the rent on their apartment in Fairborn. I said, of course. I said, stay as long as you need. I meant a few months, maybe 6, maybe 8, long enough to get back on their feet. I'd been generous with that timeline, I thought. I hadn't charged them anything. I'd adjusted my routines without making an issue of it. I'd given them the larger guest room and moved the things from the small guest room down to the study so they'd have closet space. 2 years and 4 months of that arrangement, and at no point had I stopped thinking of them as guests. I'm not sure they thought of themselves that way. I went back downstairs that afternoon when I heard Connor's truck in the driveway. He came in through the side door with a fast food bag, dropped his keys on the counter, and said, "Hey," like he was surprised to see me, though not particularly. I was standing by the kitchen table with my arms crossed, which is not normally how I stand. And I think he noticed that, because his expression shifted slightly. "When did you get back?" he said. "About an hour ago," I said. "I'd like to talk to you about the study." He nodded slowly and set the food bag down. "Yeah, so Brianna has been wanting a space for her art stuff for a while now, and honestly that room was just sitting empty, Dad. It's not like you were in there every day. It's not about how often I was in there. I know. But you were going to be gone for 3 weeks, and she needed somewhere to work. And it just made sense. We can put things back, if it's a big thing. One of the shelves is cracked." He frowned slightly. "Which one?" "The middle one. Oak. I built that shelf." He had the grace to look briefly sorry. "I didn't know that happened. I can look at it." "Connor." I said his name flat and even. "Your mother's things were in a cardboard box next to the lawnmower." He didn't say anything for a second. Then, "We were careful with it. It wasn't a storage unit," I said. "That room wasn't empty. It was full of things that belonged to me. And some of them belonged to your mother. And neither you nor Brianna had any business moving any of it without asking me first. You were in Columbus. I have a phone." He looked away, jaw tight. I didn't think it was going to be this big of a deal. That sentence. I've turned it over in my mind many times since then, the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. I didn't think it was going to be this big of a deal. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I should have asked." Just a measurement of my reaction against his expectations and a quiet implication that my reaction was the problem. I said, "How are the job applications going?" He looked at me. "What? You've been here 2 years. I've asked you a few times. Last time you told me you had some leads with a freight company out of Springfield. That fell through." "When?" "In December." "It's March." He picked up his keys from the counter and turned them over in his hand. "I've been looking, Dad. It's not like I'm just sitting around. What did you do today?" He looked at me with something that wasn't quite anger but was adjacent to it, the look of a man who has gotten comfortable and doesn't appreciate the comfort being noticed. "I had some things to take care of. I'm going to need you to start applying seriously," I said. "I want to see something concrete in the next 30 days. Applications? Interviews? Something." "Are you serious right now? You've been home for an hour. And in that hour I found my study converted without my permission and your mother's photograph in a cardboard box next to a lawnmower, so yes, I'm serious." I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that. I didn't yell once during that conversation. I said everything in a measured tone that I'm not entirely sure I've ever used with my son before, not stern exactly, more like someone reading the terms of an agreement aloud that he intends to hold the other party to. Connor left the kitchen. I heard him go upstairs and close the bedroom door. I stood in the kitchen for a while, and then I went to the garage and brought Patricia's things back inside one at a time and set them on the kitchen table until I decided what to do with them. That night I called my brother Gary, who was still recovering well from the knee replacement and had spent 3 weeks watching me cook his meals and drive him to physical therapy without once being anything other than grateful. I told him what had happened. Gary said, "Raymond, you should have kicked them out when they stopped looking for work." Gary has a talent for being right about things in retrospect. Over the next several days, I watched my house with the particular attention of a man seeing something he'd stopped looking at. Brianna had rearranged the cabinet above the refrigerator. She'd moved my socket wrenches from their hook in the garage to accommodate a storage rack she'd bought. She'd replaced the bathroom hand towels with ones that matched a color scheme I hadn't agreed to. She'd put a small whiteboard on the refrigerator for a weekly meal plan that listed her dietary preferences at the top like a header. None of these things was catastrophic on its own. Together, they made a picture. I also discovered, going through some mail that had accumulated on the counter while I was gone, that our electric bill for February was $340. I don't run the heat above 68. I'm a retired electrician. I know what it costs to heat a 1,400 square foot house in February in Ohio. $340 meant someone had been running the heat above what I'd asked more or less continuously while I was away. I also discovered that my neighbor Frank had knocked on the door twice the week before, per a sticky note he'd left, asking about a noise complaint from Hendricks, the man 2 doors down. Brianna apparently had her friends over on a Saturday evening while I was in Columbus. Frank told me the music was going past midnight. I sat with all of this for a few days. I'm the kind of man who likes to be sure. Patricia always said I deliberated too long, that by the time I made up my mind, the moment had passed. She was right about a lot of things, but I'm not sure she was right about that. When I make up my mind, I make it up all the way. On a Saturday morning about a week after I'd gotten home, I asked Connor and Brianna to sit down at the kitchen table with me. Brianna brought her coffee. Connor sat with his elbows on the table and the look of someone who expects an inconvenient conversation and has already decided not to be moved by it. I told them calmly that I needed the study restored to its original state by the end of the following week. I told them the cracked shelf needed to be repaired or replaced. I told them I would be setting new house rules regarding utilities, guests, and noise going forward, and that I had written those rules down and would leave a copy on the counter for them to read. And then I told them that I thought 30 days was a reasonable amount of time for them to find their own place, and that I expected them to start looking immediately. Brianna set her mug down. "Are you asking us to move out?" "I'm telling you I think it's time," I said. "You've been here over 2 years. I think that's long enough for a temporary situation." "Temporary," Connor said. He said it with a faint laugh that was supposed to communicate that I was being unfair, that reasonable people would not define 2 years as temporary, that my expectations were out of proportion. I know my son. I know how he argues. "That's how it was described when you asked to come," I said. "I have the text messages if you'd like to look at them. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I am an honest man and I believe in clear information. I had reread those messages the night before, November of the year before last. Dad, I know this is a big ask. It's just temporary, I promise. We just need to get back on our feet." Those were Connor's words. I hadn't forgotten them. I don't think he had either. But he had chosen to let them get soft around the edges, and I hadn't. Brianna said that they had put a lot of time and energy into this house, that they'd done things for me while I was gone, that it felt unfair to be asked to leave on such short notice. I asked her to list the things they'd done for the house. She mentioned some cleaning and a light bulb she'd replaced in the upstairs hallway. I mentioned the electric bill. She said that wasn't the point. Connor said that 30 days wasn't enough time to find a place in this market. I said 60 days then, counting from today. He said that felt like an ultimatum. I said it was an agreement, and that I hoped we could treat it like one. He pushed back from the table and said he needed some air and went outside. Brianna sat for a moment looking at me with an expression I've seen on people who have just discovered that a door they thought was unlocked isn't, and then she took her coffee upstairs. I stayed at the table and drank my coffee, and watched the light move across the linoleum the way it does on winter mornings when the sun is still low and sharp. It wasn't a comfortable feeling. I want to be honest about that. There is nothing comfortable about telling your son that the kindness you extended has been used up. It doesn't matter how right you are. It sits heavy. But here is what I also felt, and I think this is the part that matters. I felt like myself. I had not felt entirely like myself in my own house for a long time. Connor and Brianna were quiet that day and the next. On Monday, Connor came downstairs while I was having breakfast and said he'd spoken with Brianna, and they understood, and that they would start looking. He said it stiffly, but he said it. I thanked him. He poured himself a glass of water and went back upstairs. It was not a warm conversation, but it was a real one, and I'll take real over warm most days. Over the following 2 weeks, they began looking in earnest. I know because I could hear Connor on the phone in the evenings, and because Brianna mentioned a couple of apartments they'd toured. I stayed out of it. I didn't ask for updates. I just held to the agreement and let them work. What I did do, quietly, was call my attorney. Her name is Dolores, and she's been my attorney for 11 years. and she has the particular quality of a woman who has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. I explained the situation. She asked several questions. We talked for about 40 minutes, and at the end of it she said, "Raymond, the things you want to do are all sensible, and you should have done a couple of them sooner." I told her that was fair. I had her update my will. I won't go into every detail, but I made certain changes that better reflected my current circumstances and my current thinking about what my estate should do and who it should benefit. Connor remained in it. He is my son, and I love him, and I had no intention of being punitive, but I made adjustments. I also had Dolores draft a formal license to occupy termination letter that I held in reserve in case the 60-day agreement wasn't honored. I didn't tell Connor about any of this at the time. That is the part some people might call cold. I've thought about it. My reasoning was this. The agreement was still being honored. Connor was looking for apartments. If the situation changed and they stopped cooperating, the letter was there. If they followed through, the letter would never be needed. Telling him about the legal steps I was taking would have introduced conflict into a process that was going smoothly. And for what? To be transparent? I was transparent where it mattered. I had told them plainly what I needed. I was following through plainly. What I did with my own attorney and my own paperwork was my own business. I did have one harder conversation. About 3 weeks into the 60 days, Connor sat down with me after dinner. Brianna had gone to a friend's place, and he said, in a way that was less guarded than he'd been in a while, that he knew things had gotten out of hand. He didn't make a list of apologies. He's not that kind of man. But he said it. He said he thought he and Brianna had started to treat the house like it was theirs, and he could see now how that had happened and why it wasn't all right. He said the thing with the study was wrong and he was sorry about it. I listened. I told him I accepted that. I told him I also thought he and Brianna would be better off with their own space, not as a punishment, but because I genuinely believed it. I said that living in someone else's house, even someone who loves you, has a way of stunting things that should be growing. He looked at the table for a while, and then he nodded. That was probably the best conversation Connor and I have had in several years. I'm glad it happened. I wish it had happened sooner. They found an apartment in Beaver Creek 6 days before the 60 days were up. 2 bedrooms, reasonable rent. Close enough to the Springfield corridor that Connor had real options for work. He had 3 job interviews lined up by the time they signed the lease, which was 3 more than he'd had in the previous several months. Pressure, it turns out, is clarifying. Moving day was a Saturday in early May. I helped them load boxes into the truck, and I drove to Beaver Creek with them and helped carry things up to the 2nd floor. Brianna was quiet most of the day, but not hostile. Connor was tired and efficient in the way men are when they're doing physical work and trying not to be emotional about it. When we were done, I shook his hand and he pulled me into a brief hug that caught me a little off guard. I drove home with the windows down. I spent that first evening putting the study back together. The repaired bookshelf, Connor had taken it to a furniture shop and had it fixed properly, which I gave him credit for, was back against the east wall. My drafting table was back by the window. I put Patricia's Bible on the corner of the desk the way it had always been, and I put the Gatlinburg photo on the shelf at eye level where I could see it from the chair. It was a warm evening for May. I opened the window and let the air in. The maple in the backyard had come fully in by then, and it made a sound the way maples do when there's a breeze, that particular layered sound like paper and water mixed together. I sat in my reading chair with a glass of bourbon, and I didn't read anything. I just sat there in that room that was mine again. It wasn't triumph, exactly. It wasn't the feeling you get from winning a thing. It was quieter than that. It was more like the feeling of coming back to something you'd almost let go of, putting your hands around it and finding it still warm. I thought about Patricia. I thought about how she would have handled this differently. She had a gift for keeping the people she loved close without losing herself in the process, and that was never my particular talent. I thought about Connor as a boy. The summer he was 11, and we built a Pinewood Derby car in this exact room, the 2 of us at this exact table, and how he'd been so precise about the measurements. I wondered how you get from that to a man who puts his father's things in a cardboard box without asking, and I didn't have a complete answer. Probably there isn't one. I've talked to Connor 3 times since they moved out. The conversations have been easier than they were for a while. He has a job now, regional dispatch manager for a freight carrier out of Dayton, decent salary, something he can build on. Brianna is teaching a ceramics class on Thursday evenings at a studio in Yellow Springs, which is apparently something she's wanted to do for years. I didn't know that about her. I don't know if she did either, until she had her own space to figure it out. My house is mine again. That sounds like a small thing to say at the end of a long story, but I mean it literally, and I mean it in every other way too. The towels in the bathroom are the ones I chose. The heat stays where I set it. I can walk to the kitchen at 6 in the morning in the silence that I like, and make coffee the way I make coffee and stand at the window looking out at the backyard without explaining myself to anyone. There are people who would say I was too rigid, that a man with a grown son and a house with extra rooms should have been more accommodating, should have found a way to share the space more graciously, should have prioritized the relationship over the inconvenience. I've heard that argument. I understand it. I don't think the people making it are wrong about relationships mattering. I think they're wrong about what accommodation means. Accommodation isn't handing someone the keys and stepping back until you can't find yourself anymore in your own home. Accommodation has a limit. And the limit is the place where generosity curdles into something that doesn't serve anyone. Not you. Not the people you're supposed to be helping. When I let Connor and Brianna come 2 years and 4 months ago, I was generous. When I let that arrangement stretch without structure or expectation, I stopped serving anyone. Not them. And certainly not myself. The robin is back on the study windowsill. Patricia bought it at a craft fair in Dayton in the fall of 2009. She said she liked it because it looked alert, like it was about to say something. She was right. It does look like that. I've been looking at it for 15 years, and every time I notice that expression, that ready, watchful look, I think about her, and I think about the fact that she always knew what she wanted and where she stood, and she never apologized for either. I try to take the lesson when I can. My brother Gary drove out from Columbus last month for the weekend. We sat in the study for most of Saturday evening talking, the way we used to in our father's garage when we were young and the nights were long and nobody was asking us to be anywhere. He asked me if I had any regrets about how I handled things. I told him I regretted that it took me as long as it did to say what needed to be said. He said that sounded about right for me. I said yes, probably. Then he asked if there was any more bourbon, and I got up and got it. And we sat in the room that is mine and talked until it was late, and the maple outside had gone quiet, and the whole street had gone quiet, and there was nothing left to say except good night. That was enough.